Capital City Sunday.
On Tuesday, President Joe Biden won the Democratic primary in Wisconsin, and former President Donald Trump won the Republican primary. Trump was actually in Green Bay holding a rally as Wisconsinites cast those primary votes. He took the stage at the KI Convention Center before a huge crowd who braved a snowstorm to be there. Trump was already looking ahead to the presidential election in the fall.
The most important day in the history of our country will be November 5th of this year. Not long.
This was the former president's first visit to Wisconsin since August 2022. And in the meantime, President Biden is returning to Wisconsin. He'll be in Madison tomorrow. This is President Biden's fourth visit to Wisconsin since December. Now, new polling data shows Wisconsin is still crucial for the presidential candidates as we march closer to November. Political reporter Darielle Fair has more from the latest Marquette Law School poll.
And here with me now, I have Charles Franklin, director of the Marquette Law School poll. Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
So you just recently released a new poll this week. You surveyed about 1,000 people. 868 of those were registered voters. Let's break down some of those numbers. You asked survey participants if the presidential election were held today, would they vote for former President Donald Trump or President Joe Biden? One area of the poll looks at registered voters that are likely to vote, registered uncertain voters, and voters who have not registered for this year's election. Are there any trends in the demographics of those voters in these categories from what you've seen that play a role in which candidate, Biden or Trump, they're likely to vote for?
There's quite a difference by likelihood of voting. Among all registered voters, we have the race tied 50-50. But among likely voters, that is, registered voters who say they're absolutely certain they'll vote, then it's Biden ahead by 4 points, 52-48. But when we look at people who are registered but not likely to vote, Trump has an advantage. And when we look at people who aren't registered to vote, Trump has an even bigger advantage. So this is a finding that shows that right now, Biden is holding a little bit of an edge with the people most committed to voting. But Trump has an edge with those registered but not fully committed. And he has a much bigger edge with those who aren't registered to vote, who might yet vote or register by Election Day.
And Charles, you spoke a little bit about uncommitted voters. On that conversation of undecided voters, the April primary was on Tuesday. We saw about 48,000 votes for uninstructed in the Democratic primary, and then in the Republican primary, we saw about 13% of votes cast for Nikki Haley, 3% for Ron DeSantis. Both candidates have dropped out of the race. Are these warning signs for the candidates ahead of the November election?
I think it's an important message to both sides. About 11% of Democrats did not vote for Joe Biden, picked uninstructed or something else. And it was about 21% that voted for somebody other than Donald Trump. Neither party wants to lose 10 or 21% or 11 or 21% of their votes in the fall. But I think these fissures within the party are things that we've seen most of the year. With Donald Trump, we've seen about 30% of Republicans who have an unfavorable view of him over the past year. That's come down to more like 20% now, but it's still 20% right in line with the 21% of Republicans that didn't vote for him. On the Democratic side, Biden has a bit of a better grip with Democrats, but with the rise of the complaints about his handling of the war between Israel and Hamas, we've seen a substantial percentage. I think it was just about a little over 8% voted uninstructed in Wisconsin, a total of 11% that didn't vote for him but voted some other way. So that also shows a level of dissatisfaction within both parties, perhaps a bit higher in the Republican than in the Democratic side.
I want to bring up a graphic now. Charles, between your poll in February and the most recent results from March, there was nearly a flip among independent voters who said they vote for Biden and Trump. Support for Biden increased to 53%. What do you think the takeaway is there?
Independents are, by definition, not tied to party, and they're most likely to change their minds and be influenced by recent events. I think Biden's State of the Union speech, which a fair number of people said they had heard a lot about, is one part of that. But we should expect independents to move around a good bit over the course of the campaign. We want to watch to see if they do solidify behind one candidate and stick there. But I think we have 6 more months of campaigning to see how independents shift and ultimately how they settle down in the fall. Right now, though, you'd expect that group to be the least stable of all the groups in the survey, and that's what they've proven to do. Over the last 6 or 8 months, there have been individual polls where independents lean towards Trump, others where they lean towards Biden. In none of our polling have independents gone overwhelmingly for one candidate or the other.
Something else interesting to note from that data set, we can bring that graph back up again, is that Biden received a higher percentage of the Republican vote at 12%, with Trump receiving about 7% of the Democratic vote. Why are we seeing that shift here?
That's another one of those things that shifts from poll to poll, and I don't think we can easily say what one factor may have influenced it. Through the last several polls, we've seen Republican crossover to Biden and Democratic crossover to Trump generally be pretty similar to each other. It's a little more crossover from Republicans this time, but again, I wouldn't read too much into it. Both are getting close to 90% or more of their partisans' support, but they are subject to some different crossover. As we mentioned in the case of Wisconsin, there's a significant fraction of Republicans that aren't that pleased with Donald Trump. That doesn't mean they're that anxious to cross over to Joe Biden. And so sometimes they cross over at a little higher rates, sometimes a little lower rates. This month, though, part of the reason Biden's a little better off in March than he was in early February is that he is winning independents and getting a little bit more crossover from Republicans than Democrats are crossing over for Trump.
And Charles, as we've stated earlier in the interview, this data shows that this will be a highly contested race once again. In 2020, Biden's margin of victory came down to just about 20,600 votes. What will both candidates need to do here in Wisconsin to make sure that they are engaging the voters in such a critical battleground state?
I think the most important thing for us to appreciate is that on Tuesday in the primary, just under 1.2 million votes were cast. But in the 2020 election, it was 3.3 million votes that were cast. So we're looking at another 2.1 million people that didn't vote on Tuesday, but that likely will vote come November. Those are the big mass of voters that both campaigns have to be paying attention to. People who are not so motivated and so partisan that they vote in a party primary in April, but who very likely will turn out in the fall, and the parties can still influence how those new voters or additional voters see the candidates and see their campaigns and the issues.
Charles Franklin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that is it for this edition of Capital City Sunday. Thanks to political reporter Darielle Fair for sitting down with some of our guests this week. And as always, if you have any interview suggestions or questions for the show, feel free to email me at smasslordonar@wkow.com. But that is all for now. We'll see you back here next week. Same time, same place.